So I just had a few questions in regards to the selections. We could just jump right in. As of January 10th, 2009, Barack Obama will be the president of the United States. What is your opinion on this outcome?
I'm not surprised. I am surprised by the scope of it. And I think the scope speaks of a kind of hunger in many American hearts. I think it's also a referendum on the last four and then the four before of the Bush regime. You know, sitting president now, George W. Bush, really alienated a good number of people all across all sectors of American life. And I think that all the stars aligned for Barack Obama. And that's why I think he resisted running, say, 4 years from now, as opposed to 2008.
Chairman Fred Hampton Jr. equated Barack Obama becoming president of the United States to the South African presidency of Nelson Mandela, where nothing changed but the color of white power's representative. What is your assessment of this comparison?
Well, unfortunately, I think his comparison may prove quite apt. There is a relatively new book going around called The Incognito, and it's written by a younger man named Frank B. Wilderson. Frank B. Wilderson is an English professor, a poet, a writer, of course, but he spent several years in South Africa as a member of the ANC. So he gives kind of an inside flavor of what the presidency of Nelson Mandela actually meant to members of the ANC, members of the youth wing, member of the armed wing, and also for the poor, you know, in South Africa. Needless to say, for millions of people in South Africa, they're living in poverty. They're living in ghettos by any other name. Some still don't have running water, don't have electricity. Millions don't have decent housing. But the rich who were rich before the change of government are richer after the change of government. And what has happened is what South Africa fought for many years was to create what they called a quote-unquote colored buffer zone between the masses of the people and the very rich. Now they have that buffer zone. It's just blacks, you see. And so the class differentiation between then and now is very stark.
How do you think the international community will respond to U.S. imperialism and blackface?
I think if what we are seeing on TV is any true indication, they will celebrate. They will celebrate. And, you know, I guess what I should have said also and added to your prior point and question was that it doesn't depend on them. It depends on us. If people organize, they can make change, but they can't kind of lay down and say, well, you know.
This call is from the State Correctional Institution at Green and is subject to monitoring and recording.
Well, because of this election, we's free now. You know, there's still millions of, you know, people living in hells in America right now, living far worse now than they were, say, a year ago. You know, the hardest hit communities for foreclosures were African Americans and Latinos because they were suckered into those exploding mortgage, the ARMs, the adjustable rate mortgages with balloon payments and so forth. Look at the incarceration rate. But, you know, then look at education. I mean, after all of this progress happens on a political level. It's symbolic, you see. But on a daily lived level, where most of us are, schools are more segregated today than they were in 1970, 71. You know, you can go to any black community. You can go to Philadelphia. You can go to Roxbury. You can go to Pittsburgh. And, you know, the schools are blacker than ever. And the education, frankly, for the young generation is worse now than it was in the 70s. You know, under a segregated system, what you had all across black America were extremely well-educated teachers. They were there because they could not work in white universities or in white schools. You had black schools in the South where many of the teachers had master's degrees or PhDs. They would go up north, get their education, come back south, but they couldn't work in a public school system. They could only work in black schools. You have nothing close to that now. You know, now people run away from the public schools. Now, school is the way the state has been pushing people. They're making it into a private business. You remember Bush's famous words from several years ago. This is an ownership society. Well, that's what they tried to do. And if you didn't have capital, if you didn't own anything, well, you were on your own. And now you see where that's got us.
Most voters in the United States have no knowledge of the Electoral College or its function. Can you explain to us what it is?
Well, it's really a device placed into the Constitution that allows a small group of people, they call it an electoral college, it's not a real college, but a small group of people called electors who actually cast the formal votes for who shall be president and vice president. I mean, it may surprise people, but in point of fact, people did not vote for Barack Obama or John McCain. They voted for electors who will decide when they gather together who will receive the delegates among those electors. They do the actual voting. And this was a device put in to the Constitution so that America didn't get too much direct democracy.
Some people in the revolutionary community feel that Obama being president is a setback because it will allow the establishment to deny racism still exists in America. But the late great Kwame Nkrumah, the first president of Ghana, said that neocolonialism is the last stage of capitalism. What are your thoughts on the issue?
I would refer to what I said above and earlier, that people can't take shortcuts to organizing. Well, even with the Obama victory, if you recall the Republican convention after the Democratic convention, one of the best mocking lines that they used, and I remember specifically the former mayor of New York, Rudy Giuliani, they joked about Obama being a community organizer. Well, in point of fact, he was a community organizer. And he used those skills to beat the hell out of anybody who was his opponent. No one expected him. I mean, I remember in November 2007, no one expected him to beat Hillary Clinton. Hillary was going to be the next Democratic nominee. No one expected this guy to beat him. And when you looked at the Republican convention and how the polls changed after it, everybody expected John McCain to be a stronger candidate coming out of the convention. But this was a community organizer. So people who call themselves revolutionaries, who are organizers and activists and agitators, take the lesson about what community organizing really is. That's talking to people, organizing people, and making change. I mean, that's where change really happens. You know, talking to real people, changing their minds, bringing them over, and organizing.
This call is from the State Correctional Institution at Green and is subject to monitoring and recording.
Well, Kwame Ture used to say every time he spoke to people, at least 3 times, he would say, you must organize, organize, organize. I mean, he would beat that drum until, you know, it was deeply embedded in consciousness. He understood that unless people understood how to organize and then did that, then there will be no change. I'm not just talking about political change. I'm talking about real social change. So our people need to organize, organize, organize.
If you were allowed to vote, would you have voted? Why or why not?
I probably would have. I mean, my mother was a judge of elections, and I voted from when I was very young, so I did have that habit. There were several times I didn't, but, you know, usually it was a deeply embedded habit. I would probably have voted for Cynthia McKinney, who represented a true radical alternative. I mean, here was a black woman who stood up very strong in Congress against the Iraq War and against the Patriot Act and against a lot of the repressive measures that her fellow Democrats voted for. Well, because she stood up, she was isolated by the Democratic Party. And really, I think she suffered 2 electoral defeats because she was so outspoken. It was the Green Party that was a fit for her. And, you know, this was a black woman. I mean, if a black man is progress, a black woman is real progress. But again, I mean, organize, organize.
You have 60 seconds remaining.
Organize. We can't understate the importance of organizing.
Definitely, man. Well, thank you for doing the interview, and
thank you, Brother JR.
You know, just let us know what's needed on our end that can contribute, man, and we with it, man. We there.
Organize.
No doubt.
Organize.
You were just listening to the voice of political prisoner and prolific journalist Mumia Abu-Jamal as we discussed the presidential selection of Barack Obama and its impact on the planet. On the Block Report with the Minister of Information, J.R. If you would like to hear more from Mumia, you could go to prisonradio.net. And if you would like to hear more from the Block Report, you can hit up www.blockreportradio.com. What's the call? Free 'em all. We out.
Custom made.
Talk back to me, talk back to me. If you're proud being black, talk back to me, talk back to me, talk back to me. If you're proud being black, talk back.